Hello and welcome back to another Maya tutorial. This time we're looking at combining and merging two different objects together. So to begin with, make sure the menu set is set to modeling and your shelf is set to polygons. Now, I also have this additional information in the top left corner. That's called the Polycount. To open that, go to Display, Heads Up Display, and then Polycount. Now, this really, we only need the first three rows, vertices, edges, and faces. And in the far left column, that tells us the total for the entire scene. So if we have a look at vertices, that tells us there's 36 vertices in the entire scene. The middle column is the number for the object that's currently selected. So if I select an object, it tells us there's 18 vertices on that particular object. The far right column, which I think is the most important one, is the number that's currently selected. So if I go into vertex mode by right-clicking and highlight some, that tells us there's 4 vertices selected. Now, this column is the most useful because when you're merging different objects, you might find there's overlapping vertices, edges, or faces, overlapping components that might need to be merged. And if they overlap, you don't know if there's one or more. So we really need this column to see how many there are. So I'll go back to object mode, and this is a very simple demonstration because there's two objects of equal size and an equal number of divisions. I have got another tutorial which is merging round to square objects, so you can see how to actually merge objects that have a different number of divisions. But to begin with, let's have a look at the outliner. So go to Windows, Outliner, and you can see I've got two objects titled left and right. What we need to do first is combine these into one object. So select both by holding Shift and selecting both. Go to Mesh and then Combine. And now if we select one of them, the software sees these as one object. Even though there's a gap and they're not actually touching, they are one object. And if we look at the outliner again now, you can see this one object has kept the name of the first one we selected and it's added a 1. Now that's pretty normal. We can change that though by double clicking, and I'll call that part 1. And above that we can see a left and a right group, and inside those we have a transform. This can get a bit confusing because Maya has a history, it remembers everything you've done, and that can be beneficial for some projects, but in other times it can be a bit confusing. So we need to delete the history. Go to Edit. Delete by type will work on only selected objects. Delete all by type will delete the history on your entire scene. So go to Delete all by type, then History. And that leaves us with just this one object. We can move the outliner down and out of the way for now. And I want to merge these together so there's no gap in between. And we need to have hollow objects. We don't want these faces, otherwise we're going to have hidden faces in the middle. So I can right click, go to face mode, select the first, and then Shift, select all the others, and then backspace to delete. So we have a hollow object. Same on the other side, select the first, Shift, select all the others, and then press backspace to delete. We can right click and go back to object mode. Now there's 3 ways we can merge objects together. There are other ways, but I want to just show you 3 ways first of all that you can practice. The first way is to right click and go into vertex mode. I'm just going to deselect everything by selecting the background, and I'll select just the top 2, one from the left, and then I'll hold Shift and select one from the right. If we rotate around, you can see it is the top 2, and we can now go to Edit Mesh and Merge, and that will just move them across to the center and merge them together. If I do that again for the next ones down, so I'll deselect everything by clicking on the background, select one from the left, Shift, select one from the right, and before I merge that, if we look at the poly count, it says there's 3 selected, so I must have something else selected by accident. So I'm going to select the background and select those again. We'll select just one on the left, Shift, select one on the right. Check your poly count, make sure it's just 2. So we have 2 now. Edit mesh, merge. And if we look at the poly count again, it says there's 1. So you can see how that's useful. If we had have merged that with 3, it could have really distorted the object. Some other ways, if I press Z just to undo what we have, a slightly more accurate way is if I deselect everything again, I'll select the background. If we don't want to merge these in the middle, if you want to merge one onto the other, we can use a new tool in version 2016, which is in Mesh Tools, Target Weld, and what we can do there is click and drag one vertex onto another one, and then when you release the mouse, it merges that together for you. And we can do that again, select and drag one onto another, and you can see before I let go of the mouse, it wants to snap on other vertices. So make sure it's on the one you want, release the mouse, and it will merge that together. That way is quite useful. You might have to zoom in quite close to make sure you do actually select the right one. And the third and final way, I'll just press Z again to undo this, and I'll go back to my select tool to turn the target weld tool off. This third way will only work if everything lines up. And because we have 2 objects of equal size, I can go ahead and select all of those vertices. And if we look at 1/2, we have 8 divisions. So there's 8 vertices on 1/2 and another 8 on the other, so a total of 16. And if we look at the poly count, it says 16. And we can now use the scale tool to actually scale these together. And if I zoom in a bit closer, and I'll scale just from the x-axis, scale into the middle, and we can move them together. We'll zoom in a bit closer again, and we want to scale that until they touch, and it's about when you bring one side of the scale tool into the middle. If we zoom out, and I'll go back to the select tool, it looks like they're merged. And if we went around, we can only count 8 vertices, but if you look at the poly count, it still says 16. Now we can go to Edit Mesh, and instead of clicking Merge, which only really works on 2 components, we can go to Merge and then the option box. And here we can reset the settings, Edit, Reset Settings, and we have a threshold. The default value of 0.01 will merge vertices that are currently touching or overlapping. If there is a slight gap, we can increase the threshold, and that will actually move and merge vertices together. However, if you increase the threshold too far, you can merge unwanted vertices together. So it's important everything lines up. We've got them as close as possible. We'll leave the default value of 0.01 there and click on Apply. The object looks exactly the same, but the poly count now says 8, so we know they've merged. Now, if I just undo that, I'll show you how the threshold can work. So we'll move these together, we'll use the scale tool again, and we'll leave a slight gap. If we zoom in a bit closer, I'll go back to the select tool. If we try merging those with the default threshold, you'll find it won't work. We need to increase that threshold, so let's try 0.05. Click on Apply. Not worked, so we'll try 0.1. Just increase it by a small amount. Click on Apply. It's still not gone. Let's try 0.2. And that's worked. If you had have gone too far, you might find, for example, this top vertex merges with the next one down, and it can distort the object. So the threshold can work. Just try and keep the number as low as possible and keep your components as close together as possible. Once this is merged, if you wanted to actually delete this division in the middle, we can right click, go to Edge Mode, double click on one of these edges and it should select the lot. If it doesn't, we can select 1/2 hold shift and select the others, go up to edit mesh, and then we have delete edge and vertex, and that will delete all of that away. If you simply press backspace, it will delete the edges, but the vertices will still remain. So practice this, use the Polycount to your advantage, and if you want to merge and combine objects with a different number of divisions, have a look at my next tutorial, which is merging square objects with round objects.